tutorial, I will show you 4 new features in AutoGate FMO gating, cluster outlier gating, viewing relevant single stain controls for a XY projection, and monitoring all marker expressions when gating in the XY projection pursuit. I'm going to start by opening up an experiment that was done on the LSR2. And when you open up an experiment with AutoGate, if it hasn't been run before with AutoGate, then it'll bring up this setup screen. Here you need to tell AutoGate before it can start any gating analysis what the samples are, which are compensation controls, which are multi-stain controls, what the stain sets are, and also what stain sets are associated with which sample and how to compensate them. So in the first screen, we just have to tell it which type of sample each file found is. And if the information was correctly labeled in the LSR2, then there's very little work to do here other than explain for the single stain and unstained controls whether there are beads or not, whether there are beads or cells used. The next step is to confirm or define the stain sets found in each sample. By looking again at the files from the instrument, AutoGate has concluded there are 4 stain sets and there's 1 FMO. Here I simply go in and review each stain set by clicking on the Define button. And I'm going to look at the FMO as well. You can see that yes, there is 1 channel missing. And once I've looked at each of these stain sets, the next button will light up. If I click the next button now, it'll explain you cannot proceed until you have reviewed the 4th stain set that AutoGate found. I could change any of these channels if I wish, but they're fine. So I go to the next step, which is just simply to associate each sample with each stain set or FMO. And if that was done labeled correctly on the instrument, there's no work for me here other than clicking next. Otherwise, I can clear or set the associations by checking the checkbox or unchecking the checkbox. In the final step of setup, or second to final step, we explain how to compensate these samples if they are not side-off samples. We encourage the user, if we found single stain controls, to run our auto compensation, which is based on photon counting statistics as opposed to automatic gating of negative and positive cells in a single stain control. So we encourage people to use that auto comp rather than the one that came from the instrument or the one that you can do in FlowJo or any manual one you wish to do. So if you click on the button, basically it'll go through and compute a spillover matrix. You need to do nothing to help it. It does it all based on a more sophisticated form of mathematics than are used in other auto compensations. You can inspect the details of this. We are going to be distributing a full disclosure of how the math works for this. And then if you're interested, you can go and look at a lot of details on how it computed the spillover matrix. Otherwise, you just go ahead. You can save these matrices for use in FlowJo and or proceed to the final step. Oops. I've got Java popping up on my screen. Nothing to do with AutoGate. In the final step, I simply tell AutoGate for each staining panel or FMO what in the world, what particular set of parameters I want to start with. We typically start with a dead or a live dead detector and or a dump channel before we do any doublet singlet gating, but this experiment doesn't have a dump or a live dead marker, so this is just for illustrating the new features. I'll just simply accept the forward scatter parameters typically used for singlet gating. So now, after I finish the setup, we're ready to start the gating. And AutoGate is ready to go. It's going to allow me to click any one of these samples that I've identified in the setup wizard, and I open it by double clicking on it. The first time it opens, it computes the log linear W for the bi-exponential transformation. And it does that by looking at all the same samples from the same stain set and coming up with the best W. When a pair of parameters are selected, whether it's the first pair or another pair, AutoGate immediately does a cluster analysis and draws cluster borders. To use the cluster choices of AutoGate in one of your gates, you simply click on the cluster. So I'll do that now. I'm going to click on the cluster, and I'm going to use all of them. And to use all of them, I hold down the Apple key on the Mac or the Control key on Windows and just continue clicking, and all of them become selected with the black border. When done, you click on the down button, or you can double click. I'm going to name this gate singlets. And now I'm going to move directly to the FMO gating illustration. In this small experiment, I want to look at CD19 high cells that are also low on M9. So for this channel here, we do have an FMO, as you can see in the tree. And as soon as AutoGate notices that you've selected a parameter for an axis for which there is an FMO sample, it offers you the possibility of doing an overlay on the current multi-stain sample by looking at the FMO sample. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to do an overlay, and we need to pick there's 4 possible samples that are missing the PE reagent, and our job is to pick the one that is suitable for this particular fully stained sample. So the fully stained sample has a tube name of SB3. That was a convention of the researcher who ran this experiment. So I'm going to find the FMO for SB3. I pick that, and it asks me what percentile do I want to do a cutoff for the FMO. Typically, you want to select a percentile based on where you think the staining is most reliably indicative of no spillover on a multi-stained FMO sample. So I'll just start with 95, but I can go up to 99.9 or down to 84. The higher you go, the more likely you might bring in off-scale events or other events that are crud or garbage, and that would influence the decision on what the true staining is. So I'm going to choose 95, and when I do that, AutoGate goes out, finds the appropriate FMO sample, creates the same parent gate for that sample, and then draws the percentile for the 95th on that axis. Now, to confirm that this fully stained sample is plausible as to where the FMO line is, I can click on the actual FMO line and open up the FMO sample. When I do that, I can have a quick look and see that yes, the FMO line does look like it's at the 95th percentile for this sample. So I'm going to proceed. Now with that FMO percentile line present, AutoGate will then rule out in any of my gating selections events that are below the line. So I'm interested in the CD19 high, and I'm going to pick on that cluster, and you can see that AutoGate essentially grays out things below the percentile. I'm going to pick the ones to the right, all 4 of those clusters. If I wish, I can actually change the level of clustering detail just by right-clicking and going to Cluster Detail Preference and say, let's make the level of detail of the clusters medium. Now I've got both of the clusters that are all to the right. And in this case, I also want to include some of the outliers. I want to include about half of the outliers that are not assigned to any cluster, but are closest to the clusters chosen. So I'll move this ladder up to half, and I get more cells. Maybe move it up just a bit higher. How's that? Okay, so we've got 337 cells for this final gate. I'm just going to call it my CD19 high. I'm going to do one more gate after this. I'll close the outlier information here, and I'm going to change my axes again to CD43 by CD27. And actually I'll make it that CD45. And I'll pick the high green cluster, and we'll just make this our final gate, CD27. I can, of course, name the gates anything I want. Okay, so we've now completed a 3-gate sequence, and we want to apply this sequence to the other samples we have yet to gate. So I right-click, and I go to the first item and say Apply Gates to Other Samples. I can apply to all gates. I can apply to all samples in my experiments with compatible reagents, or I can apply it just to the other samples in this same group. And this group is called stain set number 1. So I'm just going to go to the 4 in this group. Now, I click OK. AutoGate goes out and confirms that the other samples in this group have compatible reagents. And now it wants to know, because it notices I'm using FMO gating, it wants me to confirm for it which of the FMO samples each of these other samples need. So the SB4 tube needs, in the stain set 1, needs the FMO SB4, SB5, and SB6. It will now do auto gating, which is, it'll build the gatings, the parent gates required in each of the FMO samples, and as well, it'll then do the 3-gate sequence in each of the fully stained samples. If it can. If it can't find a cluster or a gate, then you're told quite clearly the gate doesn't work on that sample, and there may be good biological reasons for that. But by matching clusters, it's more accurate than by other methods whereby gates are just dragged and dropped based on the coordinates of the gates in the XY plot. So it finished, and it brought up a nice little report. And the report shows me all of the other samples did successfully get gated down, and each of them had this FMO percentile drawn in them. And to confirm that, we can look at the gating tree, and we can see, if we make this a little bit bigger, we can go through and inspect each of the FMO gates. So that's FMO gating as well as outlier gating for picking up events closest to the cluster selected. Another thing that's new in the last month or two, here's the original sample I was gating on. Another thing that's new is just the ability to quickly see the single stain controls relevant to the current XY plot. So to do that, I just go down to the options beneath the parameters, and I say See Related Single Stain Control, and then bring up that single stain control. And it'll show a compensated and uncompensated view of it. I can do it on this axis too. And there's very little spillover in those cases. I'll refresh the single stain control for getting it all. Refresh the single stain control for this axis. So, one other thing I wanted to show you is the all marker expression monitoring that you can do as you work on the projection pursuit plot editor window. And to do that, you basically right click and say I want to look. Let's go to the toolbar, and we say that we want to watch all marker expressions. So it'll bring up a companion window to the current plot editor window that shows you for all of the, for any of the gates selected in here, what the expressions of those selected cells are on the other marker parameters, other parameters with reagent markers. If nothing is selected, then it shows you for everything. So for example, if I pick that and just choose those 816 cells, you can see it immediately refreshes. It says, oh yes, the CD19 is high. And on other parameters that we don't see, it shows you that these are the medians. So that's just a quick way of keeping track that that the cells you're picking in 2 dimensions look reasonable on the other dimensions as you're picking them. And that's it for today's demo.